Welcome to This Jungian Life. Three good friends and Jungian analysts, Lisa Marciano, Deborah Stewart, and Joseph Lee, invite you to join them for an intimate and honest conversation that brings a psychological perspective to important issues of the day.
I'm Lisa Marciano, and I'm a Jungian analyst in Philadelphia.
I'm Joseph Lee, and I'm a Jungian analyst in Virginia Beach, Virginia.
I'm Deborah Stewart, a Jungian analyst on Cape Cod.
The three of us published a book that came out in November of 2024 called Dreamwise, Unlocking the Meaning of Your Dreams. And as part of our continued oneironautical explorations...
Oneography? Lisa, help me out here.
Not really even sure. Oneironography?
Right, the study of dreams. For those of you who, like me, may not be familiar with the word.
We, from time to time, take a look at a particular dream symbol. And this time, we're looking at dreams of pregnancy and baby. So lots of people have dreams either where they're pregnant or someone close to them is pregnant, or there's a baby in the dream. Very, very common. And so we wanted to look at some of the ways that this shows up in dreams. And of course, if you want to learn more, you can check out our book, Dreamwise.
Listeners, are you interested in Jung in a very deep and substantial way? If so, if this is a real calling inside of you, that there is a path to step into a more dynamic, rigorous, and interactive learning environment about Jungian thought. The three of us trained at the Philadelphia Association for Jungian Analysts in downtown Philadelphia. It was a great time for all three of us. We became lifelong friends, and with many of the other analysts in training, as well as people from all walks of life who find Jungian work important and enlivening. The organization is accepting accepting applicants for their next semester of Jungian studies.
The Philadelphia Jung Seminar meets 8 times a year, 4 times in the fall and 4 times in the spring, for a weekend a month. And we're really excited to say that there is now an option to participate virtually if you are some distance away from Philadelphia. If you're nearby, you can come in person for 2 months out of a semester. The other 2 will be virtual. But if you're far-flung, you can still be part of it. So please check out cgjungphiladelphia.org to learn more about the Philadelphia Jung Seminar.
So, babies. Babies as symbol, baby as archetype, pregnancy as symbol and archetype. And sometimes one of the struggles around interpreting the symbol of the baby is that it's so polyvalent. There are so many potentials that can be inferred by the image of a baby, but they tend to center around this idea of the new, the potential, the nascent form of something that has gone from the mysterious unconscious, and it's coming into your hands as a knowable content, or at least the start of that.
Yeah. And fairy tales, religious images, mythology have, as I think we all know, long used the symbol of the baby as a symbol of something new entering the psyche. There's the baby Buddha and the baby Moses and the baby Jesus, and the list goes on and on. So it's a huge symbol in the psyche.
And, one of the things that we've been doing with this Dreamography project is collecting lots of dreams from you. And then we have sort of a bank of different ways that this symbol appears. And I think you're right, Joseph. I was really struck this month by the very different ways that the image comes out in dreams. And I think it centers around this idea of new life, new possibility, something young in the psyche, perhaps, but it sure does turn up different ways. So we have some dreams that more relate to pregnancy and some dreams that more relate to babies. They're obviously closely related archetypes or images, but let's just think about pregnancy for a moment. What does it mean to be pregnant as an archetypal experience, right? We're interested in it, and you'll see this in the dreams when we go there. But what is the archetype of pregnancy?
Well, one question that we could ask if that was in a dream is, what is gestating? And by that I mean, what is in the process of becoming, but yet is still shrouded, is still mysterious, the hidden ripening capacity. So that could be an attitude. It could be a realization that's breaking upon you. It could be an aspect of your personality, a trait that's not quite ready to really come right out in front, but it's gaining steam in the background in some way, and that the fetus also requires silence, darkness, stillness in some regard as it's gathering resources, as it's coming closer to an independent reality.
Yeah. I often think of pregnancy, literal physical pregnancy and metaphorical pregnancy, and the animals I've seen who are pregnant as a state of being disturbed. Something is growing and something is happening. We feel the fetus move inside us if we are the one who is pregnant. We feel the animal pacing around, preparing it a place to give birth. We know for sure that something is happening, but we don't know what. There is activity. There can be a whole range of feelings about the state of pregnancy, but there is both a knowing and a not knowing, and that holding the tension of in between the two is a disturbance. Just like throwing a stone into a pond, it disturbs the waters. It's just something different, something known and not known.
That's really interesting what both of you have just said. And one of the things that it brought up for me is this idea that it is something that starts, Joseph, as you said, sort of in the darkness and within. And it actually literally starts in the unconscious, right? Because for most of us, when we get pregnant, we don't know we're pregnant. So this tremendous thing has happened outside of any conscious awareness. And the fetus begins to grow, the cells divide. And again, not something we're consciously aware of. And only slowly do we become aware of it. These days we're able to become aware of it much earlier, but it is hidden. It is occult in that sense. It is a growth that is not yet known even to us in the beginning. I can remember when I was pregnant with my first child, I was working and I wasn't showing really, but I remember being in a staff meeting and getting up and walking across the room, and a fellow female colleague went, "Oh," because she saw, and it was that moment that it first became visible. But it's a very interesting experience to know you're pregnant, and I hadn't shared it yet, with anyone, in my professional life. So that was an interesting moment, when the new thing becomes visible.
And visible to others. I mean, visible to oneself is one domain, and then when the collective turns its eye to you and changes how it perceives you, because it knows that you are pregnant with potential.
And as the baby grows within, there is still that known and not known. Here is something that is actually happening inside me with kicking and a huge belly and all the rest of all the stuff that every woman is familiar with who's ever been pregnant. and not known. And I remember when I actually delivered, how surprised I was that there was a baby.
Right.
There was some moment of revelation of, oh my God. So I think this is just, we're talking about how big it is in personal life, physical experience, and symbolically.
Well, I'm thinking, Deb, I like that you just said that, that sure, notionally you've bought all this stuff, you've been having dreams about the baby, you've, made plans to leave work or whatever you've done, but somehow it is a shock that like, oh my God, there's a baby, and it's that moment that made me think about the very important role that pregnancy and childbirth plays in the Christian myth, that Mary's pregnant and there's no room at the inn and they're traveling and then there's a baby, and it is a moment of revelation, and it is a moment of incarnation. It is a moment of spirit made matter, and that's why I think it hits us so hard. Again, I'm speaking about it obviously pinging off personal lived experience, but thinking about that archetypally, when something is, say, an idea or an impulse, and it gestates for a while, perhaps in darkness, perhaps in a state of semi-unconsciousness, but then one day something happens and it's out in the world. There's something tremendous about having an idea that then becomes something in the world. And you can think about any number of things that you or listeners may have done. Perhaps you imagined buying a house, and it was just an idea, and then you made it happen, and now you have a house. Or perhaps you had an idea to have a podcast, and then went and did it, and then you have a podcast. It's anything that we do pretty much begins with an idea, maybe even begins with an imagination. It begins with an image. And then if we allow it to gestate and it's meant to be birthed, not every idea is, then we have something in the world. And it's that moment of, wow, this became something real in the world.
And coming back to the pregnancy, that to become pregnant with anything, with a concept, with a baby, with a new trait, it makes demands upon the body of the psyche. And with the seeding process, or with the quickening internal process, there immediately becomes a conflict between an inner process and outer demands. Because there is something about the gestation that awakens an instinct for introversion that puts us at odds with the demand for outer activity. So it takes energy. Energy is taken from other things and begins to circle around the new idea or the new trait. And sometimes people will have dreams where, for instance, a pregnant woman may have dreams where cowboys are assaulting a pregnant woman. And von Franz interpreted a dream like this in one of her texts and says that the woman's own repressed drives towards action and autonomy are now in conflict with this archetypally activated condition. So there is this tension between the life that I was leading out there in the world and now this call to brood and be still and to muse over the potential. And that's natural, to have that competition of interest, because we only have so much energy.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's something that is getting worked around and worked out in the gestating dynamic.
It's a great example of how the unconscious, as Jung says over and over, has its own direction and its own autonomy and its own energy. That literal physical baby, or an idea, a metaphorical baby, kind of takes us over, as pregnancy does. It starts very silently, and then by the end, it's very big and demanding. And when we give birth to it, it has its own life. And we're not totally in charge. Our egos and what we feel like doing today is not what's going to govern the process. We're enlisted in service to something greater.
And I think artists really feel this.
Yeah.
When they're gestating a new art piece, they might be quiet. They may not actually act in their medium for days or weeks or months as they ponder the thing that's trying to come together in their imagination, which then introduces, I think, the archetype of containment. Because the uterus, literally, but also psychospiritually, is a very special kind of alchemical vase, which sometimes can show up in the dream as a cave, going into the cave, and that certain things can only happen in the cave or underwater. And so we'll discover that we need a place for the new thing to be nourished, where the water of life has access to the seed desire, the quickening image inside the psyche.
You know, there's a great book that came out some number of years ago called Dream Child: Creation and New Life in Dreams of Pregnant Women. And written by a Jungian analyst who collected dreams of women who were pregnant. And then she looks at some of this, and I think those dreams really pick up many of the themes that we've been discussing about this.
So in addition to the containment, one of the things that we know in the outer world is that when a woman is pregnant, when the seed quickens, this enormous transformation happens inside of the woman herself. And if we extrapolate that to an archetype, we could say that when the seed idea quickens in any person's psyche, that the entire personality begins to change to accommodate the gestating process. And I'm sure, Lisa, you can speak to the remarkable changes that just get set in motion.
Yes, whether you will or not. It has its own process, its own life that is one's own life and not at all one's own life. And it's very much like an idea, and very much, we haven't mentioned the archetype of the self, with the capital S, self, but that there is something else in me, of me, and not at all mine, that has its own direction and will take us, we hope, to completion and the healthy birth of something new, whether a physical baby, a project, some event in the psyche. It's a great metaphor. It's very human. We all get it. And it happens, I hope it happens in and for everyone in some way.
So turning again to von Franz, in her writings on the Aurora Consurgens, which is a very dense alchemical treatise, she introduces the baby, the thing that emerges, as connected to the self, the true personality in its nascent form. And she brings forward this wonderful term, the infans solaris, the sun child, which is also present in the 19th tarot key called the sun, where there are small children that are dancing in a fairy ring, which is another kind of uterine symbol. So in her treatment of that idea, that the sun and the moon come into a sacred union that produces the solar infant. This also happens with Isis and Osiris producing Horus, God and Mary producing Jesus. But for our inner work, that the ego and the anima animus, which is the potential that's waiting for us from the self, finally know each other well enough to become a complete potential. And out of that, something remarkable begins to emerge, which is this union of the various opposites inside of us. And that profoundly changes the personality and is the work of individuation.
Yeah, and Joseph, you lifted up this important kind of variant of the child archetype, which is the divine child, which appears in multiple mythological systems. And in the book Dreamwise, actually, we do talk about that archetype in the chapter on the self, because, and Deb, you mentioned this. The self is the guiding center of the personality, and it can present in dreams in all kinds of different ways. And in the book, we mentioned some of them. There's no way such a list could ever be exhaustive. But one of those ways is it can present as a kind of divine child that carries, the thing about the divine child is it carries the new attitude for the culture. It carries salvation and redemption and the medicine that the culture needs for renewal.
This potential, this divine potential, this inspired view on behalf of the collective, which I think shows up in mythology, also is both fragile and eternal.
Mm-hmm.
That it requires something. In the mythopoetic story of the birth of Jesus, the three kings come and offer resources because they're necessary. That we have to tend the miraculous birth, or else it might not come to its fullness. We have a responsibility to the baby, so to speak, that's born inside our soul.
And that baby is often comes from the unexpected, diminished, outcast, exiled part of the psyche. You know that in the Christian myth, of course, Jesus is born in a manger, outside anything that is normative. Moses is found in a basket floating down the Nile. Many of the Greek heroes were rejected. They were the product of various liaisons between Zeus and mortals, and were outcast and had trials and tribulations not acknowledged. And so I think it's important to think about this opportunity as something that is divine, something that is eternal, and something that's often not recognized, liked, or acknowledged as legitimate by the ego that wants to come in and be part of a new beginning.
Right. So that reminds me, Deb, of that feeling that some of our potential is in danger, that it's underdeveloped, rejected, neglected, and it needs some protection from us, even if it's just protection from our own critical hostility towards our own potential. That the rejected part, the stone that was rejected, becomes the cornerstone of the temple. It is such a wonderful redemptive piece of this.
Yeah, and that is part of the mythologem of the child, that the child is often endangered. And as you said, Joseph, in the Christian story, or you talked about, Deb, with Moses, the birth of Krishna is being pursued by some terrible demons and has to be hidden away. And that is, very, very common in different mythological stories about the divine child, that it is in peril. And Joseph, I like what you said. It might be imperiled from our own critical voice. The new thing that comes, we might be likely to want to reject it because, as you said, Deb, it comes from an undervalued part of the psyche. And also it threatens the ego defenses. And so we might be prone to attack it.
And we see that all the time. People contemplate writing a book or doing some creative endeavor, And then as they move towards it, they get filled with a kind of horror and a dread, which can mean many different things. Is there an internal figure that's attacking it? Is the demand so numinous that the ego can't form a relationship to it? And Jung says something, that the child archetype is an anticipation of individuation, which is the seed of the self that if it's nurtured, it might not be nurtured, but if it's nurtured, could lead to psychic wholeness, but that wholeness is going to make a radical demand upon us that can be, we can feel intimidated and ambivalent about that much change.
Jung talks quite a bit about the child archetype. He has a whole essay about it in volume 9.1, The Archetypes of the Collective Unconscious. And he says the child archetype is a link to the past, but he has a beautiful paragraph about the futurity of the archetype. So I think I will read that, which relates to what you were just saying, Joseph. One of the essential features of the child motif is its futurity. The child is potential future. Hence, the occurrence of the child motif in the psychology of the individual signifies as a rule an anticipation of future developments, even though at first sight it may seem like a retrospective configuration. Life is a flux, flowing into the future, and not a stoppage or a backwash. It is therefore not surprising that so many of the mythological saviors are child gods. This agrees exactly with our experience of the psychology of the individual, which shows that the child paves the way for a future change of personality. In the individuation process, it anticipates the figure that comes from the synthesis of conscious and unconscious elements in the personality. It is therefore a symbol which unites the opposites.
I don't think it can be any better said than that.
So, I wonder if we should move to the dreams that we collected, but before we do, let's just take a moment to remind you about our Patreon.
We're hoping that everyone will join us in our subscriber community. You can become a patron, which helps us by sharing a little resource each month so that we can keep the podcast up and running, and we provide special bonus content. This week, we are interpreting a dream from one of our patrons that involves a walk through a dark forest with a rather mysterious black dog. A potent symbol, really interesting for us to interpret, and we'd like to interpret your dream as well. Go to patreon.com/thisjungianlife and join us there.
Okay, well, we asked you for your pregnancy and baby dreams, and you delivered. This is part of our Dreamography program. I didn't even get it.
Cosmic storks dropping off their dreams.
So we have a special forum on our website for such dreams, for Dreamography dreams. Our next topic is going to be intruder dreams. So if you've had a dream of an intruder, please don't send it to our usual dream inbox, but click the link under our Dreamography project. We will include that link in the show notes, and you can submit it there. And as an extra bonus, everyone who submits a dream will be eligible to receive a free copy of DreamWise, Unlocking the Meaning of Your Dreams. So do check that out, but let's go to some of the wonderful dreams that you all submitted for this topic. Deb, do you want to read the first one?
Yes, this first dream is from a 45-year-old woman who's an artist, and here is the dream. I was riding my motorbike around the Tuscan hills. When riding uphill, I noticed that the road looks different, as if there had been a flood, and some points were broken, but I continued my way up. When I reached the top of the hill, I noticed that the road required me to go through a house. Once inside, I noticed that there were 2 rectangular, sharp-edged puddles. I was worried my motorbike skills weren't enough to cross the muddy puddles, positioned one after the other, without falling from the bike and harming myself. So I came down from my bike to reflect about it when a woman, a florist that I know, showed up. I was surprised to see her there. She seemed really comfortable about herself. When I asked her if she lived in that house, she said, "Yes, I live here now, but I'm pregnant. So if you want to see me again, you won't find me here because I'm moving somewhere where I can raise my baby." For context, the dreamer says, "I had this dream when I was working and exhibiting some of my works in a gallery where I felt really uncomfortable emotionally. I couldn't showcase the works that I cared the most about, plus I didn't agree with the way the artists were treated in that space. A few months later, I decided to leave the gallery and decided to take care of myself and my work, knowing that finding another space like that was not going to be easy. For feelings," she says, "I felt curiosity toward the landscape around me and also felt scared. The two rectangular puddles really made me upset because in theory puddles are not deep, but they looked like they were. The sharp edges made me doubt my writing skills. The pregnant woman felt like a relief, but at the same time I was surprised because this woman exists in my real life. She is an actual florist, but she doesn't have children and never looks as happy and comfortable as in the dream." For associations, she offers, "I am married, but both I and my husband decided not to have children because I want to explore other things as a couple, like our work as artists. I never felt the urge to be pregnant or be a mom. I do feel urgency to create work, and the creative process is sometimes painful to the extent that often I refer to it as going into labor. The road where I was riding my motorbike is a beautiful, typical Tuscan landscape that I used to ride through by car, not my bike, when I was studying pottery." So, this gives us a lot to work with.
Well, there it is, right? This association with pregnancy as an image of gestating a creative project. I think that's really important to highlight, that pregnancy dreams are not necessarily about an actual baby, although they might be. And yes, women who are pregnant have dreams about babies and pregnancy, but lots of the rest of us also have dreams about pregnancy because it refers to a psychological state. So this is such a good example of this. She's just very clear this is not in her personal experience. But here it shows up in this dream at a kind of critical moment when she's worried she won't be able to cross these puddles. There's something, it's almost like the resolution of the dream is the pregnant woman saying, "I'm moving somewhere else."
Yes, that some kind of a change is required in this woman's psyche in order for this creative seed to come forward and be nurtured properly. So I'm curious about that moment where she's moving pretty fast. She's on a motorcycle. I mean, she could zoom right past the pregnant woman, and the dream maker creates a situation that causes her to slow down and to have to brood over the waters, which also happens in Genesis, right? And brooding upon the waters then calls forth, so to speak, this rather comfortable pregnant figure who's giving her some pretty specific stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to find me here again because there's another place that's better where this can be tended and brought to fullness.
And that may well relate to what she says in providing the context, that she has moved on from a place that felt uncomfortable emotionally. And that finding another space will be hard. It won't be easy. But like the pregnant woman in the dream, she needs a place where she can raise her creative baby.
Mm-hmm. Right. So that gallery she was exhibiting at wasn't the right place. I mean, this is a rather basic interpretation of the dream, but I think it is true. And then, of course, there's always other levels too. But she can take better care of her creative offspring at another gallery. So the pregnant woman then comes as kind of the answer and a shift in attitude that sort of gives her permission to tend to herself better. One of the things I think is interesting is why it's a florist. And I mean, we don't have the dreamer here. We can't ask her more associations about this particular woman. So I'm going to riff on the idea of a florist, which is florists are interesting because we tend to go to a florist to mark major life transitions. So when do you give flowers? You give flowers when someone has a baby. You give flowers when someone dies. So in some sense, I wonder if they're a bit of an image of a kind of guardian between the realms, because their work is often so tied up with the creation of new life, but also with loss. So that's just some speculation.
I think that adds a really deep dimension to it. But also just thinking about what flowers are. I mean, flowers are the reproductive process that eventually will lead to the creation of the seed. So the flower is required for this reproductive cycle to happen. And the florist is the one who's presenting this, but is also stopping the reproductive process from occurring by cutting the flower prior to its seeding. So it's an interesting ambivalence.
Yeah, we get flowers when they are in full bloom, when they are at their best. The roses or the bouquet or whatever it is arrives. And we know that it will be short-lived. So it sort of bridges, life and death, the fullness of the blooming and its transitory nature.
There's also just a brief amplification I would use, which comes to the story of the Grail. So Percival is there in the court. The Grail, which is this holy object, kind of just floats through the room. Percival kind of doesn't know what to do about it, and he's kind of sent out of the castle because he didn't say the right thing. He didn't know what to do about it. And then there's another journey. So the woman in the dream says, I am here now, but if you want to ever see me again, you will have to search for me because I'm going to be somewhere else when I raise the baby. So we've got a glimpse of the mystery and then the promise of a whole other journey that the dreamer needs to go on, much like Percival, to find the holy object.
To find the baby.
To find the baby.
That's beautiful, Joseph. I really like that. And, and it sort of fits, right? That she's on a bit of a quest. I mean, we don't have the sense that she's looking for something, but she is out in the countryside on her motorbike. And it's a very individual way of traveling. And the dream seems to make a point of this, right? Because she said that when she used to drive through this countryside, it was always in a car, not a motorbike. So the dream maker is like, you're on a motorbike, which is individual. It's a little bit more, I don't think you can really take anyone with you on a motorbike, at least not easily.
Not really, and you're very exposed, and it's riskier. You really can be much more readily injured on a bike or motorbike than in a car. So there's something very daring. I always think whenever I see anybody on a motorcycle, wow, daring to do that.
I love the standalone phrase, if you want to see me again, you won't find me here. Just that phrase has so much fascinating energy. If this were Maya Nalisand, I call this going fishing. You pick a little phrase and then you just repeat it to yourself. If you want to see me again, you won't find me here. If you want to see me again, you won't find me here. Then you just see what images and associations just pop up that may not be related to the dream, but relevant because the language is so evocative in and of itself.
It sounds like something from a fairy tale. It's exactly like something that would happen in a fairy tale. I love that you lifted that up. Yeah. And of course, we could think about this pregnant woman as a shadow figure, really containing
Mm-hmm.
positive shadow qualities, I think, because, or golden shadow, as it's sometimes called, because she's here to help the dreamer um, gestate her own new babies.
And she's got to make a choice. The dreamer has a choice. If you want, it's conditional. If you want this, you're going to have to find me. If you don't want it, so be it. It's up to you.
Our next dream comes from a 38-year-old woman who was in her third trimester of her first pregnancy when she had this dream, and she is a postdoctoral researcher. Here's the dream. I was pregnant and at a medical checkup, but it was taking place outdoors near a tree. I was asked if I had given birth before, and I said yes, and pointed to a large, gray, boa-like snake a short distance away. When I had given birth to the snake, I had been cut under my ribs, though it was now healed. It had healed, but the snake had also been cut. The snake seemed lethargic and piled up and unconcerned with us. For context, she notes, I was in the third trimester at the time of the dream. I now have a 2-month-old, our first child. At the time, I was still figuring out where I would give birth as I live in my husband's country and the medical system is different from my home country. I was concerned about the rate of episiotomy and other procedures, which are now less practiced at home. I was also concerned about starting maternity leave, sharing the mental load and chores with parenting, finishing preparation at home, neither of us being in a stable career, etc. For feelings, she says, it felt matter of fact. I didn't feel maternal toward the snake, just like it was a fact that I had birthed it previously. It wasn't now mine, it was just there. I was not afraid of the snake, which is different from every snake dream I have ever had. For association, she notes, I was in the third trimester at the time, and my husband and I were expecting our first daughter. The pregnancy was going well. So I think I just first want to state that there are plenty of dreams where the mother gives birth to a snake, right? There's Prince Lindworm, and there's also an Italian tale called Biancabella and the Snake, where a snake kind of visits her in the garden, and then sure enough, she later gives birth to a snake. So this is a mythological dream image right here.
Yes. And just to, the Prince Lindworm tale is about a woman who, as in many a fairy tale, can't get pregnant, and a wise woman gives her the way to go ahead and do this. She can eat a flower, but she can eat a white flower or a red flower, but not both. And of course, she eats both. So, whenever you're told not to do something in a fairy tale, you can pretty much count on it happening. So she gives birth to 2 babies, and one of them is a giant snake who goes slithering off as soon as he hits the floor, and the other is a beautiful baby boy. So, of course, we thought of this fairy tale right away.
And one of the things that the fairy tale tells us, because if you know the tale, the snake does go away, and the mother doesn't divulge this to anyone. She doesn't tell anyone that there was another snake baby. And it comes back to bite her, so to speak, when her other child is of marrying age. And the prince, wants to get married. And then Prince Lindworm comes along. I always kind of picture it as sort of like Jabba the Hutt, this giant fleshy snake, and says, a bride for me before a bride for you. And he was the eldest. The snake baby was the eldest. So they had to marry him off. And it creates all kinds of problems because he likes to eat the women he marries. So
he keeps devouring the bride, which is kind of unfortunate.
Doesn't work so well. But anyway, it's this idea that something, we birthed something and then we disavowed it. We didn't let ourselves know about it, and we hoped that it just went away. But in fact, it may come back. So I'm thinking about this snake that she feels a little bit like, that's not mine. Is like, okay, what part of that What part of her psyche is she disavowing there that she gave birth to?
Well, I take a leap into the story of Adam and Eve in the garden. And although that was not Eve's child, it is, in a Jungian sense, very much the birth of ego, the birth of will, the birth of consciousness. And I think it ties in with the image of Prince Lindworm in that this is psychic content that we are at best ambivalent about admitting into consciousness. And I think it's interesting that in the dream, she says, I didn't feel maternal. Neither does the queen in the Prince Lindworm story. It was just a fact. And it's mine. So it has reappeared just as the prince, as the Lindworm reappears in the story. Here I am, demanding recognition and demanding admission of my right in the story to be married. But here I am. Recognize me. Get to know me. The shadow content has reappeared.
I think that's right. And I also think that it may have something to do with instinct. Snakes are very much imagistically part of our kind of rest and digest unconscious. All of the unconscious processes that go on, it's like our primitive nervous system. It kind of looks like a snake snaking up our spine. And of course, that is a huge thing when we're gestating something, when we're gestating a human or we're gestating an idea or something creative, is that, we're tapping into that layer sometimes. So we mentioned Bianca Bella and the snake and that fairy tale that is in the Italo Calvino collection. Here's a dream from a woman who was pregnant. And this is from the book Dream Child that I referenced before, just to kind of contrast how snakes show up. I was at the hospital when a nurse came in and put the baby in my arms. There was a bathing tub where childbirth would happen. The water was clean. Suddenly we saw a snake moving in the bathing tub. First it was flat and transparent, but soon it was hard and coiled. I thought this was interesting because I compared it with the movements of the baby inside my womb. The other people were frightened and wanted to kill the snake. Tranquil and without fear, I told them it was going away and would not harm anyone. So again, in this dream, there's this association between the snake and the baby. And is it possible that this image is kind of pointing to a very deep, embodied, instinctual process?
We don't have her associations to the snake, which is unfortunate, but I have an intuition that this may be a dream about a previously terminated pregnancy. And as happens, if people have chosen to terminate a previous pregnancy, when they become pregnant again and decide to bring it to term, that the previous pregnancies come into mind. They come into the process and they become something to consider because the relationship towards the pregnancy and the possibility of child has changed. So I'm wondering if the lethargic, piled up snake represents a previous experience that's requiring attention, that's requiring tending and consideration.
Mm-hmm.
That's a real far reach. She did not say that in her associations. That's purely intuitive, but I could kind of imagine that.
What I'm thinking about is that you've touched on what I just touched on a little bit ago, which is shadow content.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it is something as concrete as a previously terminated pregnancy, whether intentional or not, or whether it is something that the person is simply not ready to recognize consciously, as in the Prince Lindworm story, where it goes slithering off to grow until it can come back years later and demand recognition. We don't know. But and that it is instinctual. I mean, we talk about the reptilian brain, the Kundalini movement up the spine as a serpent. And of course, it's also something that is grounded. Snakes are ground creatures. They don't have legs. They're right there at the base of things, feeling every inch of the world that they slither over. So I think it's an interesting question as to what it might represent. And it's interesting that it is archetypally a feature in fairy tales and religious mythology and so on, that the relationship between spirit and instinct, shadow and light, is right there at the core.
You know, to lift up again, Deb, your point about shadow, there's an African fairy tale called The Story of Two Women. And it's a great story for shadow because there are these two women and they each have a baby, and the baby is very much associated with the snake. So she brings home a snake, and it depends on how she tends it, whether or not she then gives birth later to a baby. And in one dream, she doesn't tend it the right way, and she bad things happen to her. But in the other dream, she's very gentle with the snake, and then she gives birth to a baby. So, and I talk about it. I'm going to do a little self-promotion here. I interpret that fairy tale in depth in my book, Motherhood. So if anyone's interested in following that up, there's a lot about snakes and fairy tales in there.
The last amplification I'd like to offer, which is really zooming way up in the atmosphere, but it has something to do with a concept that Jung called the alchemical monstrosity, that sometimes as we are on a path to wholeness, that the ego can come into union with some content in the unconscious that is not the anima animus, but maybe some other kind of content. And in the way that it comes together, it produces an image of oneself or the image of a kind of creative task that is, in a sense, malformed and not something that can be pursued. Some analysts have used the artwork of Hieronymus Bosch. He has these panels in I think it's the Garden of Delights.
Garden of Earthly Delights. Yeah.
Earthly Delights. And one of them represents this kind of idealized, perfect form. But then on the sides, there are these distorted, tortured kind of forms. And it speaks to the delicacy of the process of individuation. Sometimes we can have a kind of false individuation. The self becomes close, we take it in, but we're not ready, and then it has strange effects in the psyche and can make us feel quite unwell. And then we have to go back to the drawing board and come into a different kind of pregnancy. So again, not knowing this person, but giving birth, quote unquote, to a monster, which of course happens in the Greco-Roman myths all the time, suggests a problematic union between the ego and something else, which again may need to be thought through as her creative process continues.
And my imagination is she needs to actually go and make friends with that snake who's wounded. The snake is cut. So, and it was wounded a lot. Like she had a wounding. She had a wounding, and the snake was wounded.
Yeah, the last thing I'll say is she had this dream when she was in the third trimester of her pregnancy. And I know in my experience and in comparing stories with many another woman, we know in the third trimester especially, what if something goes wrong?
Yeah.
There's always an awful fear in the psyche that what if something goes wrong?
Uh-huh.
What if this baby is not okay? And so I wonder about that as a possibility of the worry that I think is embedded in humankind for millennia. Pregnancy and childbirth were very, very dangerous. And could be imaged as the monstrosity, or in this woman's dream, the wounded instinct, the wounded snake.
Yeah. From that standpoint, Deb, I would just say that she's concerned in the associations about the rate of episiotomies. And for those who may not know what that is, but sometimes during a natural childbirth, if the baby is having a very hard time exiting the body, a surgeon will make a surgical cut at the top of the vaginal opening in order to just make it larger so the baby can exit. Then that gets sewn up. But it can be very painful, and sometimes it happens accidentally with a tearing, etc. But there is this parallel process between she is cut and the serpent is cut. And that may suggest that the serpent represents her, and the serpent may represent her fear of how she will wind up if this isn't handled correctly. Will I just be lethargic and piled up and an object that no one is concerned about if I am cut in a certain fashion and it'll turn out badly? And so the snake could be, again, as you said, Lisa, something she needs to take care of, which is based on her fear of being injured by the process. Our third dreamer is a 32-year-old man who is a psychotherapist. And he writes, I find out that my childhood best friend is having a baby by himself. I tell him that I will help him raise it. We both move into his parents' attic, a room we spent a lot of time in when we were young. I have many good memories from there, as well as the entire house. I felt a great deal of responsibility and pressure involved in helping my friend raise the child, and told my family about my commitment. They were supportive to an extent, but also questioned why I would do such a thing. I told them I was excited to be a father. At a certain point, I remembered that I have a pregnant wife who needed me to be our own child's father. It became immediately clear to me that this was much more important since it was my own child, but I also felt that I had made a commitment to my friend. I felt torn. To my surprise, my friend told me that I didn't need to help him raise his own child, and that he never asked for my help in the first place. He was simply glad to have my support. This felt very relieving to me, and I moved out of the attic to live with my wife and wait for my own child to be born. For context, he writes, my wife and I moved to a new city, got married, got pregnant, and bought a house all in the same calendar year. It's been a lot to marriage and has been stressful, but we are handling it well. As for feelings, in the dream he felt responsibility, anxiety, and relief. And he adds, for associations, I have always wanted to be a father and am very excited to finally become one. My friend's house has been a feature in many of my dreams. My friends and I spent much of our time there. We were often left unattended and could get away with whatever we wanted to a certain extent. We felt safe there.
There's something so sweet about this dream. I mean, of course, what I really wish we knew more of is this friend. Who is this friend? Who is this friend to the dreamer? We know a little bit that there was a kind of magical quality about spending time in this house where they could safely get up to whatever they wanted, which reminds me a little bit of imagination. Because in imagination, you can do whatever you want and you're safe. You could imagine doing all kinds of things that you couldn't do in real life because they'd be dangerous or illicit or whatever. So there's something of a wonderfully protected space in the psyche that's imaged by this dream. But I do wonder specifically about the friend too, because the dreamer, essentially the dream shows there's a bit of a torn allegiance between this inner, I would say a shadow figure that is gestating something and perhaps the outer life reality of the pregnant wife.
And I think the dream does a beautiful job of kind of carrying the dream ego forward, that this childhood best friend shadow figure is having a baby by himself. And we move into the parents' attic, which is, in my first take on it, a representative of the past.
Yeah.
This is where we grew up. This is where we were kids. And the attic is up above, remote. We usually put things in the attic from the past that we want to keep in case it's useful or because it carries memories and strong associations. So he kind of goes from the past into the present of helping his friend. Like, okay, and now you're pregnant, my friend, and I'm going to help you with this. And then this wonderful transition to, oh my gosh, I almost forgot. I have a pregnant wife who needs me to be our own child's father. And that it's lovely when a shadow figure really is so well developed that he or she has autonomy and the friend can say, I really don't need you. I release you into the present.
Yes.
I release you into the future. I release you into your partner and your own real fatherhood. It's just, this is just such a gift of a dream.
It's so generous. One of the things that I was just imagining is, and thinking about my own experience as a boy and my childhood friends. But when two boys are of a certain age, they're just so thick as thieves. They're so close and playing in the attic and the sharing of secrets that in his imagination, going back in time and remembering when the two of them were gestating the concept of what it will be to be a man. And with the birth of his child, he will give birth to the father archetype within himself.
That's lovely.
So I think there is something that is nascent and being born in that young male piece that now he is giving birth to. And that the shadow figure is aligned with this process of coming forward as the man that you were imagining you would be when you were 10, 11, 12 years old.
I really like what both of you said. That's really great. And one of the things that I wonder about, and Deb, I think I'm picking up a little bit on what you said, is for this friend to have a baby, and this friend is a shadow figure, and this friend is it's a creative, it's fertile, whatever that part of his psyche is, because it's going to have a baby. And sometimes, there can be a conflict. I'm sort of taking this dream as a split between a subjective and an objective stance, and kind of assuming that the wife and the pregnancy refer to something actually in the outer world. And if we're looking at becoming a parent, especially if we're very conscientious, as it sounds like this person is, and we've had a lot of responsibility, they bought a house, they moved, there's a lot going on. There must be a lot of kind of energy going to meeting these outer world developments or requirements. Any part of us that is creative might be missing nurture. And I think I agree with you both that it's a real gift, this dream, because I think it's saying, I'm going to be okay. I can nurture our creative offspring in here up in the attic. I'm so glad to have your support, but I release you to go out into your real life and know that your creative offspring, whatever that might be, as we said before, an attitude, an idea, an impulse, a project, an urge, it's going to be, I can do it. Your shadow, I got this.
Yes, exactly.
Well, but I think that if we change the formulation to the same gender figure as an image of the self, that may play a little bit more, because the self does contain all of our potential. And just as you said, the self can be the safeguard, the protective container of the personality potential, just as you were saying, Lisa, as he's busy with the outer world, which is kind of the work of the first half of life. Don't worry about all that self-actualizing stuff. get your baby and your house and your family in order. Somewhere around midlife, come back and we'll give birth to the next stage, the next potential.
There are two potentials here.
Yeah, inner and outer, just as you were saying, Lisa. I think that really captures that process.
And both of them seem like they're doing well. So if you would like to be featured on a future Dreamography episode, do check out the link in the show notes to send us your intruder dreams. I think that's going to be a very interesting one. And remember, you'll also be entered into a drawing for a free copy of DreamWise, Unlocking the Meaning of Your Dreams. Thanks for listening. To submit a dream, suggest an episode topic, or join our mailing list, visit our website, thisjungianlife.com. If you enjoyed this episode, give us 5 stars and a good review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and make sure to click the notification bell to be alerted whenever we upload videos. And keep up with all things TJL by following us on Instagram, Facebook, X, and TikTok.